Hello, as you know, our level psychology exams are just around the corner. Do you know exactly what's on the AQ spec? In this video, I'll run you through every topic you need to revise. This covers both year 1 and 2, so please skip as needed, and let's get exam ready. Okay, so the first topic you need to know for paper 1 is social influence. Here you need to know types of conformity, internalization, identification, and compliance, explanations for conformity, informational social influence and normative social influence, and variables affecting conformity, including group size, unanimity, and task difficulties investigated by ASH, and conformity to social roles as investigated by Zimbardo, explanations for obedience, agentic state, and legitimacy of authority, and situational variables affecting obedience, including proximity and location, as investigated by Milgram and Uniform. Further, the dispositional explanation for obedience, the authoritarian personality, explanations of resistance to social influence, including social support and locus of control, minority influence, including reference to consistency, commitment, flexibility, and the role of social influence processes in social change. Topic 2 is memory. You must know the multi-store model of memory, sensory register, short-term memory, and long-term memory, features of each store, coding, capacity, and duration, the types of long-term memory, episodic, semantic, procedural, the working memory model, central executive, phonological loop, visuospatial sketchpad, and episodic buffer, features of the model, coding and capacity. Next, the explanations for forgetting, and retroactive interference and retrieval failure due to absence of cues, factors affecting the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, misleading information, including leading questions and post-event discussion, anxiety. Finally, improving the accuracy of eyewitness testimony, including the use of the cognitive interview. Topic 3 is attachment. You need to know caregiver-infant interactions in humans, reciprocity and interactional synchrony, stages of attachment identified by Schaffer, and multiple attachments and the role of the father, animal studies of attachment, Lawrence and Harlow, explanations of attachment, learning theory and Bowlby's monotropic theory, the concepts of critical period and an internal working model. Ainsworth's The Strange Situation, types of attachment, secure, insecure, avoidant, and insecure assistant, cultural variations in attachment, including Van Azendorn, Bowlby's theory of maternal deprivation, Romanian orphan studies, effects of institutionalization, the influence of early attachment on childhood and adult relationships, including the role of an internal working model. Topic 4 is psychopathology. You need to know the definitions of abnormality, including deviation from social norms, failure to function adequately, statistical infrequency, and deviation from ideal mental health, the behavioral, emotional, and cognitive characteristics of phobias, depression, and obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, the behavioral approach to explaining and treating phobias, the two-process model, including both classical and conditioning, systematic desensitization, including relaxation and use of hierarchy, flooding. Next, the cognitive approach to explaining and treating depression, Beck's negative, triad and LSA-ABC model, cognitive behavior therapy CBT, including challenging irrational thoughts, and the biological approach to explaining and treating OCD, genetic and neural explanations, drug therapy. Topic 5 is covered in Paper 2, Approaches in Psychology, and looks at origins of psychology. First, want introspection and the emergence of psychology as a science. Next, the basic assumptions of the following approaches. Learning approaches, the behaviorist approach, including classical conditioning and Pavlov's research, operant conditioning, types of reinforcement, and Skinner's research, social learning theory, including imitation, identification, vicarious reinforcement, the role of mediational processes, and Bandura's research, followed by the cognitive approach, the study of internal mental processes, the role of schema, the use of theoretical and computer models to explain and make inferences about mental processes, the emergence of cognitive neuroscience, the biological approach, The influence of genes, biological structures, and neurochemistry on behavior, a genotype and genetic of behavior, evolution and behavior, the psychodynamic approach, the role of the unconscious, the structure of personality, that is it, ego and superego defense mechanisms, including repression, denial and displacement, psychosexual stages. Furthermore, you will cover humanistic psychology, free will, self-actualization, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs focus on the self-congruence, the role of conditions of worth, the influence of counseling psychology, and you'll need to make comparison of approaches. Topic 6 is biopsychology, and you need to know the divisions of the nervous system, central and peripheral, somatic and autonomic, the structure and function of sensory relay and motor neurons, the process of synaptic transmission, including reference to neurotransmitters, excitation and inhibition, the function of the endocrine system, glands and hormones, the fight or flight response, including the role of adrenaline, next localization of function in the brain, hemispheric lateralization, motor, somatosensory, visual, auditory and language centers, Broca's and Wernicke's areas, split brain research, plasticity and functional recovery of the brain after trauma, ways of studying the brain, scanning techniques, including functional magnetic resonance imaging, electroencephalogram, and event-related potentials, the post-mortem examinations, biological rhythms, circadian, infradian, and ultradian, difference between these rhythms, and the effect of endogenous pacemakers and exogenous site jebbers on the sleep-wake cycle. Topic 7 is research methods. You must know experimental method, types of experiment, laboratory and field experiments, natural and quasi-experiments, observational techniques, types of observation, naturalistic and controlled observation, a covert and overt observation, participant and non-participant observation, self-report techniques, questionnaires, interviews, structured and unstructured, correlations, analysis of the relationship between covariables, the difference between correlations and experiments, content analysis and case studies. Okay, so within topic 8, scientific processes, you will need to understand the following aims: stating aims, the difference between aims and hypotheses, directional and non-directional, sampling, the difference between population and sample, sampling techniques including random, systematic, stratified, opportunity and volunteer. Implications of sampling techniques including bias and generalization, pilot studies and the aims of piloting, experimental designs, repeated measures, independent groups, matched pairs, observational design, behavioral categories, event sampling, time sampling, questionnaire construction, including use of open and closed questions, design of interviews, variables, manipulation and control of variables, including independent, dependent, confounding, operationalization of variables, control, random allocation and counterbalancing, randomization and standardization, demand characteristics, and investigator effects, ethics, including the role of the British Psychological Society's Code of Ethics, ethical issues in the design and conduct of psychological studies, dealing with ethical issues in research, the role of peer review in the scientific process, the implications of psychological research for the economy, reliability across all methods of investigation, ways of assessing reliability, test-retest, and inter-observer, improving reliability, types of validity across all methods of investigation, face validity, concurrent validity, ecological validity and temporal validity, assessment of validity, improving validity, features of science, objectivity and the empirical method, replicability and falsifiability, theory construction and hypothesis testing, and paradigm shifts, reporting psychological investigations, sections of scientific report, abstract, introduction, method, results, discussion and referencing. You should also know about data handling and analysis, in particular quantitative and qualitative data, the distinction between qualitative and quantitative data collection techniques, primary and secondary data including meta-analysis, descriptive statistics, measures of central tendency, mean-median mode, calculation of mean, median, and mode, measures of dispersion range, and standard deviation calculation of range are calculated. Percentages are positive, negative, and zero correlations. Presentation and display of quantitative data, graphs, tables, scattergrams, bar charts, histograms, distributions, normal and skewed distributions, characteristics of normal and skewed distributions, analysis and interpretation of correlation, including correlation coefficients, levels of measurement, nominal, ordinal, and interval, and content analysis and coding. Topic 10. The issues and debates in psychology. You will need to know about gender and culture in psychology, universality and bias, gender bias, including Eurocentrism and alpha and beta bias, cultural bias, including ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, free will and determinism, hard determinism and soft determinism, biological, environmental, and psychic determinism, the scientific emphasis on causal explanations, nature-nurture debate, the relative importance of heredity and environment in determining behavior, the interactionist approach, holism and reductionism, levels of explanation in psychology, biological reductionism and environmental, stimulus response, reductionism, idiographic and normothetic approaches to psychological investigation, ethical implications of research studies and theory, including reference to social sensitivity. Okay, so for a level psychology paper 3, you must choose 3 optional topics, 1 from each of the 3 option blocks. So bear this in mind when watching this checklist, as we will cover all 9. Optional topic: relationships. For this you need to know the evolutionary explanations for partner preferences, including the relationship between sexual selection and human reproductive behavior, factors affecting attraction in romantic relationships, self-disclosure, physical attractiveness, including the matching hypothesis, filter theory, including social demography, similarity in attitudes and complementarity, theories of romantic relationships, exchange theory, equity theory, and Rusbult's investment model of commitment, satisfaction, comparison with alternatives, and investment, Duck's phase model of relationship breakdown, intrapsychic, dyadic, social, and grave dressing phases, virtual relationships in social media, self-disclosure in virtual relationships, the effects of absence of gating on the nature of virtual relationships, parasocial relationships, levels of parasocial relationships, absorption addiction model, and the attachment theory explanation. Optional topic: gender. You must know about sex and gender, sex role stereotypes, androgyny and measuring androgyny, including the BEM sex role inventory, the role of chromosomes and hormones, testosterone, estrogen, and oxytocin in sex and gender, atypical sex chromosome patterns, Klinefelter syndrome and Turner syndrome, cognitive explanations of gender development, Kohlberg's theory, gender identity, gender stability, and gender constancy, gender schema theory, psychodynamic explanation of gender development, Freud's psychoanalytic theory, Oedipus complex, electrocomplex, identification and internalization, social learning theory as applied to gender development, the influence of culture and media on gender roles, and the typical gender development, gender dysphoria, biological and social explanations for gender dysphoria. Options: cognition and development. For this topic you must know Piaget's theory of cognitive development, schemas, assimilation, accommodation, equilibration, stages of intellectual development, characteristics of these stages, including object permanence, conservation, egocentrism, and class inclusion. Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development, including the zone of proximal development and scaffolding, Beilagen's explanation of infant abilities, including knowledge of the physical world, a violation of expectation research, the development of social cognition, and Selman's levels of perspective-taking, a theory of mind, including theory of mind as an explanation for autism, the Salian study, and the role of the mirror neuron system in social cognition. Options: schizophrenia. For this topic you must know the following: the classification of schizophrenia, Positive symptoms of schizophrenia, including hallucinations and delusions. Negative symptoms of schizophrenia, including speech poverty and avolition. The reliability and validity in diagnosis and classification of schizophrenia, including reference to comorbidity, culture, and gender bias and symptom overlap. Biological explanations. Schizophrenia, genetics and neural correlates, including the dopamine hypothesis. Psychological explanations for schizophrenia, family dysfunction and cognitive explanations, including dysfunctional thought processing, drug therapy, typical and atypical antipsychotics, cognitive behavior therapy and family therapy as used in the treatment of schizophrenia, token economies as used in the management of schizophrenia, and also the importance interactionist approach in explaining and treating schizophrenia, the diathesis stress model. Options. Eating behavior. For this topic you'll need to know the explanations for food preferences, the evolutionary explanation, including reference to neophobia and taste aversion, the role of learning in food preference, including social and cultural influences, neural and hormonal mechanisms involved in the control of eating behavior, including the role of the hypothalamus, G-hrelin and leptin, the biological explanations for anorexia, including genetic and neural explanations, psychological explanations for anorexia nervosa, family systems theory including enmeshment, autonomy and control, social learning theory including modeling, reinforcement and media, a cognitive theory including distortions and irrational beliefs, biological explanations for obesity including genetic and neural explanations, psychological explanations for obesity including restrict theory, disinhibition and the boundary model, and the explanations for the success and failure of dieting. Options. Stress. If you're taking this option, you'll need to know the physiology of stress, including general adaptation syndrome, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system, the sympathology pathway, and the role of cortisol, the role of stress in illness, including reference to immunosuppression and cardiovascular disorders. Next, sources of stress, life changes and daily hustles. Workplace stress, including the effects of workload and control, stress, self-report scales, social readjustment rating scale and hustles and uplift scale, and physiological measures, including skin conductance response, individual differences in stress, personality types A, B, and C, and associated behaviors, hardness, including commitment, challenge, and control. Also managing and coping with stress, drug therapy, benzodiazepines, beta blockers, stress inoculation therapy and biofeedback, gender differences in coping with stress, the role of social support in coping with stress, types of social support including instrumental, emotional and esteem support. Options. Aggression. For this topic you need to know the neural and hormonal mechanisms in aggression, including the roles of the limbic system, serotonin and testosterone, genetic factors in aggression, including the Mauer gene, the ethological explanation of aggression, including reference to innate releasing mechanisms and fixed action patterns, evolutionary explanations of human aggression, the social psychological explanations of human aggression, including the frustration aggression hypothesis, social learning theory as applied to human aggression and individuation, institutional aggression in the context of prisons, dispositional and situational explanations, and also media influences on aggression, including the effects of computer games, the role of desensitization, disinhibition, and cognitive priming. Options. Forensic psychology. For this option you need to know offender profiling, the top-down approach, including organized and disorganized types of offender, the bottom-up approach, including investigative psychology, geographical profiling, next biological explanations of offending behavior, and historical approach, atavistic form, genetics, and neural explanations. Also psychological explanations of offending behavior, Eysenck's theory of the criminal personality, cognitive explanations, level of moral reasoning, and cognitive distortions, including hostile attribution bias and minimalization, differential association theory, psychodynamic explanations, dealing with offending behavior, The aims of custodial sentencing and the psychological effects of custodial sentencing, recidivism, behavior modification, custody and anger management, and restorative justice programs. Options: addiction. You need to know about describing addiction, physical and psychological dependence, tolerance, and withdrawal syndrome, risk factors in the development of addiction, including genetic vulnerability, stress, personality, family influences, and peers, explanations for nicotine addiction, brain neurochemistry, including the role of dopamine, and learning theory as applied to smoking behavior, including reference to cue reactivity, explanations, gambling addiction, learning theory as applied to gambling, including reference to partial and variable reinforcement, cognitive theory as applied to gambling, including reference to cognitive bias, reducing addiction, drug therapy, behavioral interventions, including aversion therapy and covert sensitization, cognitive behavior therapy. AMD, the application of the following theories of behavior change to addictive behavior, the theory of planned behavior, and Prochaska's six-stage model of behavior change. Well, that was a lot, wasn't it? If you're feeling overwhelmed, don't stress. There's plenty of time to get exam ready. If you have any questions related to any of the topics we have mentioned or would like a video on a particular topic, please leave a comment below. Thanks so much for watching. Like and subscribe for more, and good luck.